even in the dark, pre-dawn, no one could mistake that it was Bishop Oswald opening the door and a woman was stepping through. He got the first, before even Utad or the two Beric men. Osrith, Luamocha tilde Diarus Cecile. There were no other words, then. Osrith, who had heard her name, looked up as Finan ran to her and she ran to him, then, and threw her arms around him as he did the same. He bent to kiss her as she stood up on tiptoe to kiss him. Osrith, Finan's voice was low, comforting, like he used to be when she was feeling vulnerable about something, and he would allow her to push herself close to his chest when they lay in bed together, which then, sooner or later, led to kisses, and caresses, and touching, which led to hands on her tits, Finan squeezing them, her nipples hardening under his strong, muscular hands, which would wet her cunt, which would rouse his cock, which she would envelop with a hand of her own, then work her way down, her mouth covering it, licking the underside of it, as Finan began to lose himself to the pleasure that her mouth was giving to him, the back of her throat closing around his foreskin, his pre-cum filling her throat as he gave into his pleasure. Osrith felt whole when it was the two of them together. Secure when he would turn her over and hold her to him as he would finger her folds, his hot breath to her shoulder as he pushed inside gently but insistently, curling his fingers up inside her cunt. That would sometimes be enough cause the flow of nerve-tingling release around her hips, quicker, sometimes than tonguing, or rubbing her clit, or Osrith riding him. Finan was close. Very close to making her cry again, an emotion Osrith had experienced already, the evening before, when all hope was gone, one she decided she hated, for she now realized that she could not even remember the last time they had humped, been together, just themselves with the world far away from them. Oh, to take him away, to somewhere, just the two of them. It was Finan who let go first, and stood back from her, but Osrith was not finished, and said to Finan in Gaelish, Finan begins with Constantine. He will fight this day. That is good, it is a good thing, Finan replied, his face breaking into a smile, one that he used when he was trying to reassure her, and Osrith felt it working. He is somewhere safe. Osrith knew what he meant. There had always been questions over his parentage. Would that a sword came his way standing in the Wessex Mercia faction, on Aethelstan's side, it would eliminate another potential claimant for the throne of England. Whereas, Osrith knew, deep down, that Constantine believed him to be his own son, second son now next to Selarch, and would treat him as such, as would all of the Gaels, Strathclydians and Picts who had stood beside him all his life. I felt I could not refuse Domhnall, Osrith said, and looked past Finan as Utad said, that bare-arsed bastard. Of course you could not, Finan told her, and kissed her again. You are of Constantine. If I am, it is because I have lived most of my life in Alba, it has been my home for a long time. Then Beric became my home. And Domhnall is being given that land, Utad, with not a little measure of a loaded statement, reiterated. Osrith did not know how he could guess that, but it was not the first time that Utad had surprised her about what he knew. Finan kissed her again, and all thoughts of Constantine and Domhnall went from her head. Ha Thursday Duinagam, she told him. You can marry, Utad told her. No, she cannot, Finan said. But Utad took a step to them both. This Brehon law. I have never heard of it. It is not Aethelstan's law, and we are in a land where Aethelstan's law applies. I am not married here, Osrith admitted, looking back to Finan. Utad put a hand to her shoulder. Then, as your kin, you may ask to court you with a view to marriage, he went on. He may. But I am not your guardian, is that it? Utad's face clouded over, and Osrith shuddered at the memory of his indifference and his scorn all those years before. And this time it was her turn to speak. I saw you, Osrith told him, in the ramparts of Bibbenberg. I was 10 and you came and brought the head of Sihonbuk, who exclaimed that it was you. Her voice was low, and quavered now, even though she was filled with righteousness at the memory. I wanted to shout then and the I was here, she declared, anger filling her stomach now, anger and pain. I thought you had come for me, that you would find your little sister. But you hadn't. I wanted then to be beside you, to fight against whatever was angering you, help get revenge for you. So I would have, if I had known, Utad told her, I would be in your army. Osrith shouted, today, against the Northern Alliance number. I would be beside you and fight them all, fighting for what you believe in today. For a moment, just for a moment, Osrith thought that Utad was going to agree. He stood still and bowed his head for a moment, resting his hand on his sword hilt. But then he looked up, and his face was not solemn, his face was not sincere. It was instead cold, mocking, and he spat the words back to Osrith like damned steel being heated in a blacksmith's furnace. You will no more fight beside me as a horse will sprout wings and soar over us all. He rebutted, and Osrith felt her stomach recoil at the scorn with which he was speaking to her. You will be no help. How could you be? Potentially you are a spy. And even if you are not, do you think that I would let a half-blind old woman stand beside me? You are a liability. You would bring down my men, let in this so-called Northern Alliance. No. He finished. You? He shook his head, as if Osrith's suggestion was the stupidest thing he had ever heard. No. You may be my sister and have my protection. You can be Finan's wife and be protected also. Utad shot a quick glance to Finan. But Osrith was staring back to her brother. Even by his standards, he had been particularly cruel. You say I cannot fight in the battle this morn? I say it. Your husband says it. Finan is not my husband, Osrith told Utad, forcing herself not to look at Finan. Bishop Oswald just has to marry you, under Athelstan's law. And you will be, Utad replied. No, Osrith said, keeping her eyes firmly on Utad. If not with you, then alone. There is nothing to stop me from fighting this day. So what were you discussing with Bishop Oswald? Utad asked her. To remain at Seaster until the battle was over, and make a decision then what to do, Osrith replied, silently, in her own mind. Yes, she said, turning her head to Finan, finally, but refusing to let herself move. After this battle, then yes. Then she looked back to Utad, the man who had been the reason her life had now brought her to the eve of a huge, merciless, devastating assault on people of Britain, on other peoples of Britain. From her scabbard, she pulled out buoy. It was as bright as the first time it had been brought out of the blacksmith's fire, from somewhere in Francia. Domhnall had once told her it had been the constant in her life, not even fed a sword. Stolen from her by Finan and his brother, brought with her from Bibbenberg, and won back at Corbridge, which Bishop Oswald still had and had just shown to Osrith had been such a constant in her life. She dropped to her knees, and plunged the point of buoy into the ground before him, grasping the hilt with both hands and bowing her head. I give you my sword, whose name is Victory, Osrith began. May it serve, as may I, beside the Lord of Bibbenberg. Perhaps the sound, or lack of it, meant Utad was on the verge of accepting. Around them, a dawn chorus dared to pipe up. Osrith raised her head. I do not take it, Utad declared. No, I will not, he added, as Osrith made to plead her case. You will remain here, use your talents to defend the women. Yes, but I will not allow you to set foot upon the soil beyond this fortress on my command. Slowly, Osrith got to her feet, standing with her head high, and noticing for the first time Bean and Kaltigar standing beside Idjul. She looked at her brother with the courage a lifetime on the battlefield had given to her. Unflinching, unmoving, she glared at Utad. Then all I have done in my life had been for naught, Osrith told him, for I have spent it all looking for you. That still, Utad replied, dismissively. That, Osrith told him, who would not wish to fight with you as commander. As lord. She took a step towards him. No, he bellowed, putting up a hand. Osrith stopped. And somewhere deep in her head, a realization came to her that she may never see him alive again after they parted. I love you, Utad, Osrith declared, force behind the pitiful, vulnerable declaration. As your sister, as my brother, I ask you, have your Beric men take charge of you. Utad told Bean and Kaltigar. As terms for your freedom, she is not to leave the city, he added. Then, Utad strode away, leaving Osrith standing beside her men. We crossed through the Thornborough henges, Kaltigar told her, when she asked, out of resilience, how it was they came to be here. I once went there with my father. They are Pictish. Britons lived very far south years ago. But he was watching Osrith watch Utad walk until he was out of sight. I return to Bibbenberg as soon as I can, she told Finan with all the fortitude she could manage. I will negotiate a settlement with Domnall and Constantine, should they survive this, or Aethelstan. If they should not, I will go to the old country, and find any kin that may know of the tribe called the Idings should I be unable to be with the Beresses. She finished. Osrith, he began, and she knew. She knew Finan was sorry that Utad had behaved in such a callous and offhand manner. Knew that, had there been different circumstances, he would have stood away from his lord and taken her up, claiming her as his own. Osrith knew all of this, and knew that Finan could do none of those things, and that it would be hurting him just as much as it was hurting her. Go, Osrith told him. I will see you after the battle. 88,888,888 you could have let her, Finan said, as Dawn's light at last made an appearance all about them. Utad turned his face to his friend. And see your face if she were to die? Not by my hand, he reassured Finan. It would not be me allowing her onto the battlefield. What? He snapped at the messenger beside him. Lord Utad, the timid youth replied. It is Bishop Oswald. He has asked for an audience. By Odin's eye, has he? Utad exclaimed, and turned from Egil and Finan and headed towards the chapel. As he did so, another figure appeared at the chapel, also heading in through the door in which his brother had just shown their aunt through. It was young Utad. Finan glanced back towards Utad and then strode towards him, following him inside. Would you truly wish to fight this battle? Kaltigar asked Osrith. There are hundreds of men here, waiting to fight. The enemy must be hundreds too. The enemy are your kin, Osrith told him. Mine too, she added, as are the men who have just left us. I wish this did not have to be, but it seems that it must. And so must I. But it was too late for Bean and Kaltigar to prevent what happened next, though, having been trained by Sainid and fought many battles, their reflexes were not quite as fast as they could have been, though they tried to prevent it. Turning, to go into the chapel, she did not notice the man in the shadows who had witnessed all that had gone on between Utad and Osrith. Aldhelm ran towards her, a cloak in his hands, and wrapped Osrith in it. Between him and Miral, Osrith was bundled over the saddle in front of her former commander, who signalled for the west gates to be opened, and he was out of the bear within minutes, riding as fast as his horse could manage in the direction of the Wirral.